Yeah, it's a really good point. If you start a project, then over time, as you say, the science changes or new information comes to light, and does the project cease to exist or cease to create carbon credits? And particularly about where this really comes into effect is additionality. If you're doing this because the scheme doesn't exist and it's not considered common practice, but then everybody starts doing it and it becomes common practice, if everyone takes it up, is it still additional? And the way the government is addressing this is by creating these things called crediting periods. So a crediting period is saying, well, we can guarantee that this project, no matter what the changes in the science or what the changes in the situations are, you will continue to run that project for that period of time. Like for permanent environmental planning, it's a minimum of 15 years, you know, and they won't take it off the positive list in that period of time. So they'll give you about 5 years notice for most things to say, okay, if you start it now, you're guaranteed for the next 5 years. After that, we'll review the situation. And if it becomes common practice, and it gets taken off the positive list and then everyone else stops doing it, they'll have to put it back on, because obviously the scheme is driving its activity. So it's certainly something that has been considered, and there is a review period on each sort of methodology every few years, so you know where you're at. I think it's in the actual legislation for the clean energy future that they've got to give you a 5-year window of any changes that are going to occur. Under the Permanent Environmental Planning's methodology version 5.1, it specifically states that you have to plant a mix of overstory and understory species that are local to the area. When it comes, you also in the regulations they define what a tree is, that it's supported by single or multi stems and consists of wood, which means it's gone through the secondary thickening process, and I'm pretty sure in the regulations it specifically excludes vineyards. I don't think vineyards meet the additionality test. That there's an economic imperative, or people undertake vineyard production, and some may disagree with me in this room, to make money out of them. May not have been the case recently, but it's an economic activity rather than an environmental outcome. So it's not. We don't have a methodology for it. You might get something in the vineyards under the non-Kyoto sort of routine, but not necessarily under the Kyoto process. Okay. It is every certificate that's created, you can get, that's what you sell, and that's your free and proper property. You sell it once, and that's your $23. Then if you, for example, if you're doing a forest and it grows a little bit and you get 5 tonnes, you sell those 5 tonnes for 200, 120, 150, 30 bucks or whatever it is. The next year it grows another 5, you get another 5 certificates and you can sell them again. No, only when you want to get your credits issued. You'll have to report every year to say, yes, the trees are still there, for example. But if you don't want the credits issued, you don't have to have them issued. And depending on the business model you're under, some people won't get audited for many, many years. So if you're in an aggregation, you might have the whole aggregation audited, or your carbon pooler might get their carbon pool audited, and you'll just be put into the mix and spread the cost of the verification over. But if you want to get credits issued, you have to have an independent third party verify your reports. The minimal area required is 1/2 acre. The minimum viable area depends on the location that you're in, what your rainfall is and the species you're planting. I would think for mixed species environmental planting in low rainfall areas, depending on, again, on the price of carbon, would be somewhere between 5 and 10 hectares that I would look at as one project. It might be in several smaller patches, but honestly, the bigger the better. All right, the bigger it is, because when you're doing the verification, a lot of the work will be the same for 1 hectare as it is for 100 or 1,000. So, and it might be, this is where the business models come in, it might be you have 5 hectares, then he has 5 hectares, she has 5, she has 5, and you run them all as one project, as an aggregation, as a co-op or something like that. And that's sort of the business model I think is going to have to come out, particularly with dairy farms where all the effluent can be collected, fertiliser efficiency, vineyards, looking at all the waste that comes out of many small vineyards and using them as biofuel to create biochar and to reduce your cost of electricity. There's a lot of opportunities there. You're not going to get charged $690 or whatever it is per tonne of urea you use. You're not responsible, one, for the direct emissions that come off your property from the application of urea fertilisers. There's no cost for that. The cost is in the refining, the transport of it. It's not and the production of it. It's not the actual what comes out of it at the other end. So the emissions are more about electricity inputs and energy inputs in distributing it. When it gets to your farm, you're not going to have a cost. When you go to reduce your nitrogen, you're not going to get 300 tonnes for every tonne of nitrogen you reduce that you've put out, because some of it will have been taken up by the plants. It's only a fraction of it that actually winds up going into the atmosphere. That's why you get such fairly low returns, and it depends on when you put it out, what the stage of plant growth is, how wet the soil is, and how it volatilises. So it's kind of complicated, but you're not going to be charged, $6,000 more for each tonne of urea you used.
Well, if 1 tonne of urea was equivalent to 300 tonnes of carbon dioxide gas, I would like to be paid for putting that directly into a plant rather than into the atmosphere and collect the credits.
Well, that's certainly the sort of stuff they're looking at: variable rate technology, synchronicity, and subsurface soluble nitrogen application, things like that. That can save you half of it. We've got the fertiliser companies are working on it, and it's kind of a bizarre scenario where the fertiliser companies are working on ways to get you to use less of their product to make more money for you and them. It's, you know. One of the integrity principles of the carbon farming initiative is to be conservative, and the models that you use to create the determination of how much carbon is stored in the tree and how much carbon is actually stored on the land is based on a whole series of measurements that have been done over many, many years in Australia that have been synthesised and put into the database that we draw on. So if you can actually select the species in the model, whether you want to do native forests or if you want to do blue gum, sugar gum, etc. If you want to step outside those, you can go right back to full cam and start looking at the carbon content based on scientific sampling. So you can address it, but it just becomes inherently more complex as you go down the road. No, it's not a threshold. It's based on the sort of maximum of above-ground biomass that a parcel of land can handle. Yep. So it could be lots of little trees, or it could be 1 or 2 big trees. Yep. It varies depending on where you are in the location on the continent. The model works by breaking up the continent in 250 metre by 250 metre grids, and each one of those has a maximum above ground biomass applied to it. So it's a spatial database basically, and that's what the maximum threshold for native forest is. And then we have a thing called a non-endemic species multiplier, which pushes other trees above that ceiling. So there's kind of a quasi-threshold, but not a total threshold.
Yep.
We do already have many fast-growing species of eucalypt out there, and there are plants around Dubbo parks out that way where they're actually growing mallee eucalypts, keeping the lignotubers in the ground and using that as carbon storage, and then it's harvesting the top of the crop and turning it into pallets and using those pallets shipped to Sydney, and then using them to augment the coal supply and some of those to reduce the emissions. So there are these projects going on, but there are plenty of fast-growing trees, but my concern would be introducing an exotic tree that is a fast-growing tree that would turn into a weed species, and you'd have issues with perverse environmental outcomes. So these things have to be watched. We have quarantine laws in Australia. We have lots of things to watch. And I've spoken to many companies that have tried to bring in trees from overseas to do this. And there's some issues about getting them into the nation and importantly not becoming a weed, which we've got a bit of history of importing in Australia. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's being paid or you're going to get a co-contribution from the government for undertaking the writing of a methodology for wetland development. It's certainly eligible, and I understand that I'm pretty sure under the the Biodiversity Fund, some were actually funded to undertake the restoration of these wetlands. When it comes down to it, okay, it is voluntary, definitely. You have the choice to make the decision or not. Okay, no one's going to force you into it. But if the way I advocate it, the way I speak about it is that if it's part of a good farm design, if you've been working your property for many years and you're thinking about your grandchildren's future, there are going to be some places on the property that would probably do better with trees than are going to do with the current use. And I know this country pretty well. I worked up in here for a number of years, and there are plenty of places that I don't think should be being grazed that would be better off under native bush. Now, they're going to produce some income for that now. Now, if it wasn't, I have the feeling that West Australia might have got a little bit over cleared when we got started early on. We might have just gone a little bit too hard with the dozers. And there are some areas that are erosion areas, salinity areas, rocky outcrops that aren't particularly productive. And this is why I spent so much time going through the economics and the markets of this, because this is a way to get income or a gross margin or some value out of it, and whilst you're probably combating some of the issues you face on your property, such as wind speeds, lack of shade, shelter, nutrient harvesting, erosion, salinity, sources of weed seeds and sources of feral animals. So if you go and plant your whole property to trees, well, yeah, you've excluded them from the land use. But I wouldn't be going out and planting my good irrigation paddocks to forestry. Maybe the interrows, maybe down the margins, the back paddocks, my turnout blocks, having some shade and shelter in them. But I'm not suggesting that you go and convert your entire property to trees. So, don't think about it as carbon or farming, it's carbon and farming. How do you integrate it into your farm? And you might find that your kids, your grandchildren, when they're having a picnic under this nice piece of native bush that used to be bloody full of Bathurst burr, geez, Grandpa was a smart bloke, wasn't he? You can still collect firewood on it, you can still graze under it. You've just got to maintain the same quanta of carbon on site as you have issued certificates. So it's an alternative land use. It's not locking up your land per se. And if it's protecting the crops next to you or protecting the paddock next to it, it's actually being productive, just not necessarily in a traditional way. So you can't just look at that piece of land in isolation and say it's trees, it's locked up, it's no good to anybody, because that's not the case. It's part of your farm, and it's part of a far wider landscape that is protecting all the ecosystem services that underpin our farming and production systems. I don't accept you locking it up. I just don't accept that. Okay, if you've passed the additionality test and everything and registered with Greenhouse Friendly, you can transition to this scheme, but you have to take account of any credits you've sold, and you can only start counting your sequestration from the 1st of July 2010. The 2007 date is the date where the government has decided that before the 2007 election, both parties went to the election with an emissions trading scheme, which included sequestration. So it's reasonable to assume that everybody who was planting trees after the 1st of July 2007 was doing so with greenhouse gas abatement in mind. But even if you planted after that date, after the 1st of July 2007, you can only start counting your carbon credits sequestration from the 1st of July 2010. Permanent environmental plantings are eligible anywhere. What's on the negative list is if you're going to plant a for-harvest or monoculture species in a catchment that's over 600 millimetres of rainfall. There's some qualifiers on that. If you're doing that, you can only be doing it for salinity purposes or where a monoculture naturally exists, or you have authority from the National Water Initiative or the CMA to say that it's okay, or you hold a water licence equivalent to the uptake of those trees. So it starts at 0.9 of a megalitre per hectare per year up to 1.6, I think it is, for high rainfall areas. So there are some restrictions on that to try and reduce the perverse outcomes, but when it comes to just the type of land, there's no restriction. It used to be 100 years from the date the last tonne of carbon is sold under the New South Wales scheme, but my understanding is now it's under it's from the start of the project. John Howard introduced this thing called the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting System, which uses a series of factors and methods for calculating the global warming potential in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent for each of the greenhouse gases. So any company that's been reducing over 25,000 tonnes as greenhouse gases, or corporation over 125,000 tonnes, has been having to calculate these things. So they calculate what gas am I creating, and it might be through the burning of fossil fuels, how much carbon dioxide comes out. It might be through how much methane comes from a landfill or something, and then they can calculate from those equations where they do direct measurements of them, using the science to calculate what the carbon dioxide equivalence is, and that's how they calculate that. And it's been happening for a long, long time. John Howard actually introduced it in, I think it's 2006, the Engers Act. It is registered on title, and ultimately does go back to the landholder, and I think I was pretty clear in expressing people to get independent legal advice, because that is a concern that some companies may not exist for 100 years. You do have to, anyone who's dealing in the retail market, dealing in the wholesale market, or providing advice on financial products, of which carbon credits are a financial product, will have to have an Australian Financial Services licence. All right, so if someone comes and knocks on your door and says, I'm going to deal with your carbon credits, you'll want to see their AFSL. There is also, I believe there's some money being put aside to undertake an accrediting process where people can go into a course and become an accredited carbon provider or carbon advisor. That doesn't exist. At the moment, there is no regulations really at all. You are covered by some of the financial stuff, but when it comes down to about that 100-year rule, I think that's a huge risk, personally. There are different business models out there. If you're concerned about that, you're probably better off going down the agency approach, where you're saying, well, we're going to do most of it ourselves, and we're going to take most of the risk, but we're going to take most of the benefit as well, and you don't have to transfer your carbon rights under some of those agency arrangements. So you're not really dealing with a third party, you're dealing with an agent like a wool broker or a grain merchant who help you get to market and help you market your product, work on your behalf, but don't own anything on your property. What will happen to the price? I would say you see those two lines that I showed you, the non-Kyoto and the Kyoto, will start to blend. The coalition policy, and I've got a copy of it here if you wish, has pretty much stipulated that they will continue with the carbon farming initiative, but they have a checkbook with $3.2 billion in it, and they have 160 million tonnes to buy. All right, so they're just going to buy the cheapest carbon they can first and keep going up the cost curve until they run out of carbon, or they get their 160 million tonnes, or they run out of money. They're also going to open it up to other industries, such as manufacturing industries, to say if you want to reduce the amount of carbon coming out of your facility and you can do it at a cost-effective rate, we will pay you for that. So the price, I would think, would come down. If you do the math, their maximum price is about $15 a tonne. So I think it'll come down from the 23. Now, if the Labor stays in, we know it's going to go 23, 24, 25. But give it time, and we'll see how it goes, because a lot of the rhetoric that's been said is, one, we shouldn't be sending our money overseas. Two, we shouldn't be doing anything further than the international community. Now, if we get to 2015 and we have an international binding agreement, then there's more chance that the coalition will keep some form of carbon pricing. The current system is that the Labor Party takes money from the polluters and gives it to mums and dads and to homeowners and to businesses to compensate for it. It's the complete opposite on the Liberal Party side. They're going to take it out of the tax bucket and give it to the businesses. I can tell you one thing, it's going to fluctuate. It's going to go up and down. But if you're creating the carbon credits, you don't have to sell them. You can keep them in the bank and you can wait for the price to go up. The rest of the world is going to do something eventually, and we'll have carbon credits available for sale. Personally, if I'd planted trees after the 1st of July 2007 and they were eligible and I could get them registered and get them done fairly quickly, under a little bit of an anomaly, we can go back to 2010 and count carbon from then. So I would actually get them credited, and I would do it right away when I can get $23 a tonne. Did a lot of work with Landcare Carbon Smart back in 2006-07, looking at these opportunities and working through the Landcare, local Landcare groups. It did get very complicated and complex. I think from the local Landcare group sort of approach that your job's going to be, I think there's a real opportunity for doing monitoring and working with verifiers, your local people on the ground that know the area. You can go out and have a look at the trees, you can plant the trees, you can plan the process, you can collect seed. I think pretty much what you've been doing in the past, but hopefully on a much higher scale with a lot more impact. I mean, part of the reason that we have a carbon market is to drive private investment into natural resource management, and the influence of the local landcare groups in that process shouldn't be dismissed. I think you've actually got some very big opportunities. They have to repatriate the property back to the landholders' expectations, which would include the carbon. All right, but yes, they can come in and barrel it over and take it out. But if they don't, my understanding, and there's still got a bit of work to be done on this, but my understanding is if they go in and take out the carbon, when you think about the amount of money they make out of a mine, they'll just buy the obligation out. It's not going to stop them. From my point of view, from a carbon agency and broker's point of view, is we'll be going back and looking at the actual requirements of the auditors, which have only just been spelled out in the regulations. And I'll have a look at what they need to do to prove that it is fitting with the NRM plan, because you're right, we can just tick a box and say it conforms. But there's certain projects like permanent environmental plannings we know are not going to have any issues. It's going to be other things like modifications to nutrient flows and stuff. They're going to have an issue that we might have to meet. And the other one, we'll be looking at just what are the declared weeds in that region, etc. Are we trying to combat salinity in that region? And you'd have to go through the plan. The information, though, ultimately from my point of view, is what is the order going to do and what's the order going to check. But we will have to, as an agent, have to be looking at all the 52 natural resource management plans and making sure that we fit in with the National Water Initiative. I know landholders can do it themselves, and many will be able to, but this could be another role that the landcare groups play, is providing some of the fact sheets. And I think as someone who's involved in climate change and natural resource management planning, that part of your NRM plan and the $44 million that's been handed out to update these plans needs to include some pretty clear, factual, straightforward information, even if it's to a point of, like, if you're doing project A, B, C, D, E, F, we can guarantee that it fits in with our plans. But these are the ones you've got to be careful of. If you did have natural regeneration occurring after 2007, technically it is eligible, because it is the promotion of natural seed sources or reforestation or natural regrowth or managed natural regrowth through a cessation of mechanical clearing, etc. However, you would need to prove that you were doing it for greenhouse gas abatement purposes. I don't know if after 2007 it's only for direct planting and direct seeding. All right, it's not natural regrowth after that point. You'd also have to prove that it had been cleared for 7 years prior to that. And you'd have to be careful, because some of it might go Kyoto and some of it might go non-Kyoto. If you've just walked away from it and just let it regrow because you couldn't do anything with it, then it's not going to be eligible. You need to have proved that direct human inducement. The carbon credits are accrued as the plantation grows, or as the property grows or the abatement occurs, and you only get them after you've had it verified by an independent third party. Once they're issued, they're free and proper property. You can sit them in the bank for as long as you like, but you'll get a little bit in the first year, and a little bit in the second year, a little bit in the third year, and you'll build it up over time. So it's after the activity that you actually get the carbon credits. Definitely, the soil carbon methodology is under consideration now. It's being well written. I know who's writing it. Probably 6 to 12 months before the methodology is approved by the DOIC. You've got to then turn around the ecosystem processes that are depleting soil carbon, getting it ranged into your soil carbon, getting it back into the carbon back in your soil. Minimum of 12 months before you can actually go through a verification or reporting process. That puts you out to 2 years. Tony Abbott wins the next election, August 2013. They'll have the chequebook out by November. You don't necessarily need to put a covenant on your land either. You just have to put a caveat on your title saying that there's a carbon sequestration project on the property. Because if you lose the carbon from the site, The government's going to, the compliance mechanism is going to come after the project proponent, which in this case would be you. Because if you've created the certificates and you decide that, you want to go and log some because there's, I don't know, some sports events that needs a special kind of timber to create the table or the lectern, then you can go in and log that if you want, as long as you give the certificates back. So, but yeah, look, certainly if anyone has planted trees after the 1st of July 2007 and they're growing well and they're growing now, and you planted them for good reasons, part of your whole farm plan as a windbreak or shelter belt or whatever it may be, we know it's $23 a tonne now, and then it's 24, 25. We cannot get enough carbon to feed the market. The market's as short as it's ever going to be. Now, if you've got grain and it's worth 5 times what it's going to be in 5 years' time, wouldn't you sell it now? As long as the amount of carbon on site is equivalent to the number of credits that have been issued, it'd be fined. It would be considered a depletion event. You would have to see that the forest is going to recover over some time though. You've got that 10-year rule where you've got 10 years to get it back to recovering a forest, and if it's going to happen naturally, you don't have to worry about it. You just can't create any more carbon in the future until it's reached its pre-depletion event status. And if it's not recovering, you have to take remedial steps to make it recover, or go to market and buy it out. I don't think you'd get much for your actual sequestration of the trees per se, but if you move to a different, say, fertiliser system that reduced the amount of nitrous oxide coming out, or you started treating your waste products in a different way that reduced the amount of methane being produced, and it might be through, biochar, it might be through biomass to energy producers out of the trimmings and the prunings and the waste products, then yeah, there's opportunities there. There's huge opportunities, and some of the people around here, so the Goulburn Valley's got some big emitters. They're going to need your carbon, and it's time to get active. Because even if you don't create carbon credits out of things like biomass to energy, if you've got a 25-year runtime on your biomass to energy plant, you know what your price of electricity is going to be for the next 25 years. I can promise you it's going to go up everywhere else. But if you're generating your own electricity and plugging in back a metre, you're on a winner.
There's a couple of methodologies being developed at the moment, are there, for the hort industry? I
think there is. I'm not 100% on that, but we certainly know that there's things like the biogestion methodologies that have been used in piggeries. Really, it's just a modification of those to change the feedstock and the calculations in it. The concept doesn't change a hell of a lot. It's just the feedstock.